Mostly Moshe.
I try to learn the Parsha with my kids every week. Sometimes we do it before bed, and sometimes it's easy, and sometimes it's hard because there are some parts of the Torah that have lots of really interesting stories, and there's some parts of the Torah that are a little bit more. So we try to learn it every week. We don't always do it.
What's kids stage? I really don't need that.
Okay.
Why did your name say kids stage?
I think it's Kid Stage because that's the Zoom account that I'm using. That's what it's called.
Oh.
Yeah. Makes sense?
That's why.
Yeah. Okay. You guys ready to learn?
Yeah.
Okay.
Already.
So great. Remember last week when we were learning, we learned 3 short and pretty happy stories, right? We learned
Now we get the long one.
we learned about David being a really powerful ruler who won in his wars, who protected Shaul's family, who wanted to build even the Beit HaMikdash. He did all kinds of things like that.
But he wasn't able to.
You're right. He wasn't actually able to, but he really, really wanted to.
He was too war.
Yeah. But the next story is about David doing something wrong. Now, I have a question before we do the story. Do you think
Tell us how to add me.
Do you think that David is basically a good person?
I'm not sure yet.
He's
Right now,
He basically is.
fine person. He's
Right
not so
now,
peaceful.
no, but I'm pretty sure later, yes.
So some of you think he's a good person. Some of you think you're not sure yet. Some of you think a little bit of this, a little bit of that. See, David's kind of complicated. And a lot of times, the more you find out about somebody, the more complicated they get. Sometimes David does the right thing. Like when he decided to not kill Shaul, for example, or to take care of Shaul's family. But sometimes he does the wrong thing. And in this story, he does something that's very, very, very wrong. And he gets in trouble for it. But this is what happens. So it used to be that, so there were wars. We learned all about all kinds of different wars, all kinds of different battles. Now, did you know that it used to be that you couldn't go to war in every month of the year? There were only certain months of the year that you could go to war, because sometimes it would be too cold to go to war, right? Because even if you have an enemy that you really, really, really don't like, if it's really cold and your soldiers are going to freeze when they're out in the fields, you don't go to war. So it used to be that there were only certain months of the year that people would go to war.
Wait, what if we're in the middle of war, but then it's one of the months that you can't go to war? Then like the war stops.
Yep.
So like
it's kind of nice, actually, right?
Basically pauses and then goes on. When it's a right month.
Yep. That's what used to happen. Cleo, what's your question?
I feel like spring and summer are the only times you can go to war.
Yeah, I think when it's
Probably
warmer
early
out,
fall too.
That's true. Although also, if it's really, really hot, it's also hard to have a war, right? Because imagine just what it's like to be outside in the middle of the summer. Now, imagine being outside when you're wearing like all your battle clothing and a really heavy sword and a shield, right? That wouldn't be any fun, right? So there are only certain times of year that people would go to war. Shoshana, what's your question? Shoshana, did you have a question? Or you were just raising your hand?
We are. Yeah, she doesn't know where we are. Well,
okay.
I don't know who you. I don't know. I didn't hear all of the novel.
You know what? I'll try to catch you up. We're going to learn more of the story today, and you'll be all caught up. Okay. So there's only certain types of the year that kings would go to war. Now, it's the time of the year in this story where everyone is going out to war. So David sent out his general, Yoav, with all the soldiers, the whole army, to go out and fight against the bad guys, right? To fight against the Plishtim, to fight against the king of Aram, to fight against all the different people that David liked to fight against. But David, because he was the king, he didn't go with them. He stayed home in Yerushalayim. Now, one day, it's late in the afternoon, and David gets up from his couch, and he goes over to the roof of his palace. Now you can imagine if you are the king, you have a palace, your building is probably taller than all the other buildings. You know, there's actually, in a lot of cities, there are rules about who gets to have the tallest building in the city. So like where I live in Philadelphia, for a very, very long time, it used to be that the tallest building in the city had to be City Hall. Nothing could be taller than City Hall. And if you're the king, you want to make sure that your palace is the tallest building to show everyone how amazing you are. And because he had the tallest building, that meant when David was on the roof of his palace, he could look out over all of Yerushalayim and see everybody else, right? Like if you ever been in a really tall building, or like if you live in an apartment building that's really high up, a lot of times you can see the roofs of other buildings. So
Mine is like 6.
But we haven't. But we've seen everything on Google
Also,
Earth.
there used to be colors. Also, there used to be tall hats.
I just want to say we've seen things from a hat.
We've
I
seen
can
tall
see
hats.
things from
Yes,
a
nowadays we can see things from Google Earth, but they did not have Google Earth back then, did it? They did not have satellites back then. They didn't have anything.
They did not have electricity.
They did not have electricity back then. So David goes to the top of his palace and looks out on the roof. So imagine like it's a really nice day outside. The sun is going down. David's on the roof of his house and he's looking at all the houses around him. And when he's looking at all the houses around him, he sees on the roof of one of the houses near him, he sees a woman. And she is taking a bath on the roof. That's what it says. Okay.
Why would someone go into the roof of the king's house to take a bath?
What was the question?
Why would someone go to the king's roof to take a bath?
Well, they didn't go to the king's roof. They went to a different roof, but David could see it from his roof. Why did they go to roof? That's a really good question. You know what? Maybe the air was nicer up on the roof. It was nicer than being inside. Maybe it was a little bit cooler up on the roof than closer to the ground.
That's disgusting.
But why not just
Getting naked on a roof.
Shoshana, what was your question?
Why just outside? Why on a roof?
You know what? I don't know all the answers for this one. That's what the story says. It says that she was taking a bath on the roof.
No,
Now, David is looking around.
David saw her taking a bath. Couldn't have the bathtub flipped over and they could have all tumbled down?
That's a good question. I don't know. There are rules. One of the rules in the Torah.
Because aren't roofs like one side, then either you're tilted or you're like kind of like hanging on the top.
Yeah, that's a good. I don't know, but I do know. You know,
Flat roof, not a pointed roof.
so I imagine it was a flat roof. You know, back in those times, people usually had flat roofs, right? If you live in America, a lot of times the roofs in America they're kind of slanted like this. Anybody know why they're slanted like that?
Because to fall off snow.
Right, because of snow, right? If you have a flat roof like this, the snow just piles up on top and then it crashes down inside your house and that would be terrible, right? So a lot of times in America, you have slanted roofs so that the snow can fall off.
The snow
But
slides down.
in Israel, there's very, very little snow. So you don't have to build houses like that. You can build flat roofs. So I imagine that it was a flat roof. But the other thing to know is that one of the mitzvot in the Torah is that you have to build, if you have a roof, you have to build a fence around it so that no one falls off because we care a lot about people's safety. So Henry, I think, you know, we don't have to worry about her falling off the roof because there was probably a fence around the roof. Okay. So David is on the roof. He sees this woman. He doesn't know who she is. He sees her taking a bath, and to her, this woman looks very, very beautiful. And he's thinking to himself, I wonder who this woman is. I don't know anything about her. And he goes to his servants and says to his servants, hey, go find out who that woman is. So his servants go out and they say, her name is Bathsheba, and she is married to a person named Uriah. Now, should David have been looking at someone who was taking a bath on the roof?
No.
Right? First mistake, right? He was already doing something he wasn't supposed to be doing. Okay.
Very bad.
And when he finds,
But I mean, it's also her problem because she decided to take the bath.
Yeah, that's a good question, right? Whose responsibility is it to not look when she's taking a bath on the roof? I don't know exactly the way it worked back then.
Because you're allowed to look anywhere, basically.
Yeah,
You
that's a
just-
really good question.
If you're allowed to look at a roof, but if somebody's doing something disgusting, that's their problem, and they should try to hide themselves.
Yeah.
It's not their problem if somebody accidentally looks at them.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point.
He's looking around.
Unless he says to himself, like, ooh, let's look at a naked person bathing on a roof. Then that'd be not good.
Okay.
By
So
mistake,
anyways,
then.
let me tell you the next part of the story. Okay. So David sees Bathsheba and he finds out who she is. And remember, Bathsheba is married. Okay. But David gets into his head. He decides, this woman is so beautiful. I must marry Bathsheba.
She's already married.
Exactly. She's already married, right? What's David thinking? She's already married. Shoshana, what's your question?
Probably has to listen to him when he's a kid.
Shoshana, what's your question?
Bathsheba ends up to being Shlomo's mother.
You are right. You already know part of the story, but we're going to get to that in a bit. Okay.
Okay, this is a second mistake.
Okay. So that's a second mistake, right? He wants to marry her, but she is already married.
I mean, he's a kid. The baby person named do a lot of stuff.
But David invites her into the palace because he wants to marry Bathsheba. Now David gets into his head. He has this idea. He says, I want to marry Bathsheba, but there's a problem because she's already married to somebody else. She's already married to this person named Uriah. What should I do to solve this problem? What do you think David was going to do?
Probably kill Gloria.
Kill
What?
Uriah.
He decided not only to decide he wanted to marry Bathsheba, but he decided the way I'm going to marry Bathsheba is by killing her husband. Just because he wanted to. He didn't do anything wrong. Just because that's what David wanted, he decided that he was going to kill Uriah. But now David couldn't just go kill Uriah. Uriah didn't do anything wrong. And even David, even the king, couldn't just go
remember you said there's like somebody higher than the king? Remember that?
Well, yeah, I said that sometimes the general
But
is
then
very, very
they
powerful.
say that was wrong, and now we're gonna get go and find a new king because you killed somebody for no reason.
Well, so two
Like,
things,
you
Henry.
could have just asked the husband marry somebody else, and then he just marries her, and then.
Well, so two things. The first thing is that even the king can't just kill anybody they want to kill. The second thing is you have a good point, right? Well, maybe if David kills Uriah, then he doesn't get to be the king anymore. But if you remember, one thing we learned last week, or sorry, not last week, we learned on Tuesday, is that Hashem promised David that David would stay king and David's family would stay king forever. So that's not going to happen in the story. David's not going to stop being king because of this, but he is going to get in trouble. We're going to find out. So David decides, I have to figure out a way to kill this person, but I have to do it in a way that nobody thinks I did anything wrong. So this is what David does. He invites Uriah to his palace and he says to Uriah, please come into my house, bathe your feet, get comfortable, come into my house. And Uriah comes into David's house, and David says to Uriah, you're in the army, right? And Uriah says, yes, of course I'm in the army. And he says, okay, well, my general is Yoav. I would like you to take this message, and he gave him like a piece of paper or parchment. I'd like you to take this message to Yoav. It's very important. Please take it to him right away. So Uriah takes the message and brings it to Yoav. Now, what do you think it said inside that message?
That
Kill Uriah.
That Yoav should kill Uriah. So it kind of said that, but it didn't say exactly that.
Right. Like, because there probably had a reason.
This is what it said. So, if you're fighting in the army, there's all kinds of people who fight in an army, right? There's some people in the army who, they never even hold a gun. What they do is like, they're the cook, or they're the person who delivers the mail, or they're the person who flies the plane, or drives the tank,
Or they're the people
that
who
works
give
in the
orders.
office.
right, or works in the office, right? So in the army, there's different kinds of jobs. In the army, some of the jobs are very safe, right? You're not really close to the enemy.
So
You're
we gave Oria
fighting.
nothing.
Some of the jobs you're like fighting on the field.
Right. And some of the jobs are very, very, very dangerous. Like some of the jobs are like, if you have a bunch of people fighting, if you're in the first row of people who's fighting against the enemy, then you are in a lot of danger, right?
But if you're in the last row, you're just kind of in jail.
Right. So this is what happened.
There are people
You're still in danger because you're still like very close to the enemy. Just like you're the furthest out of everybody that's fighting.
You're
But
right.
still, they could come charging back. Like the people that work in the office, they're like miles away from them. But they still come with a crew up close, the people in the last row.
Okay, so this is what happened. So David sent Uriah a message to give to Yoav, and this is what the message said. The message said, "Dear Yoav, when you get this message, take Uriah and put him in the front of your army. Put him in the place that's the most dangerous, where there's the most fighting. And then, not just that, when Uriah goes into the fight, usually when like the army goes into fight, like there's the first row of soldiers and they go to fight, and then the second row of soldiers and they go behind them. But David told Yoav, when you go and fight, let Uriah go out, but then instead of following him to help him, don't. Go backwards. Don't give him any help. Just let him fight by himself."
Then
And
that's basically like kind of killing him.
it is exactly like kind of killing him.
Obviously, he can get very hurt.
Exactly. So that's what happened, because that's what David said. So Yoav put Uriah in the front of the army. They went out to fight. Uriah went out in front, and he almost immediately got killed. Yoav told all of this to David. So Yoav sent a messenger back to David saying, "Look, David, we did exactly what you said." And he told the messenger, if David gets angry at you and says, "Hey, how come you attacked that way?" Just remind David, Uriah was in the front of the war. It was in the front of the army. I did it because of him. So David got Uriah killed for no good reason, just because he wanted to marry Bathsheba.
No.
So this is a terrible thing that David did. Okay, and so after Uriah dies, David goes and marries Bathsheba, and Bathsheba becomes pregnant. Okay, that's the first part of the story. Now, you already understand this is a terrible thing.
Say, no, you already killed my old husband, and I don't want to really marry you anymore.
That's a great question.
Like, I have no interest in marrying you because you already killed my husband.
That's a great question. In the story, it doesn't say that Bathsheba was upset that David killed her husband. Maybe she didn't know that that's what happened. But you're right. If Bathsheba found out that David killed her husband, she probably wouldn't want to marry David. But, he was also the king, and she might not have had a choice.
She might get herself killed.
But I mean,
Right, maybe she would have got killed out also.
If somebody had a choice to marry the king, they'd probably do it because that's cool. I mean, you could be the queen.
A lot of people would, although I think not everyone would. Some people wouldn't want it. Some people might be worried. Maybe if the king gets mad at me, then I'll be in trouble too, right?
I'll chop my head off.
Right, like if guys, do you know the story of Esther from Purim? Right?
Yeah.
Right? Esther was the queen, but even though she was the queen, she was really worried about being the queen because
she was Jewish.
She was Jewish. And also, remember, there was a part of the story where she was worried. She said, "Oh no, if I even try to talk to my husband, Achashverosh, at the wrong moment, maybe he'll kill me just for walking in at the wrong moment." So she was scared of him, even though she was married to him. All right. So Bathsheba gets pregnant. Now, Hashem obviously knows exactly what's going on, and Hashem is not happy with David at all. But here's the thing. kings sometimes don't want to listen to anybody else. They're so powerful, they think they're always right, and they're not very good at taking criticism when they do something wrong. So Hashem wanted to make sure that David knew he did something wrong, and to make sure that he did teshuvah, that he repented, that he did the right thing. So so this is what Hashem did. He sent Natan, the prophet Natan, to David, and told Natan, find a way to tell David that he did the wrong thing. So this is what Natan did. Natan came to David, and he didn't tell him, David, you did a terrible thing. You should be ashamed of yourself. You are in so much trouble now. This is what Natan did. He told David a story. And the story, you tell me what you think the story means. Natan said to David, I want you to tell me what you think should happen in this story. This is a story about two people. There's a poor man and a rich man. Now, the rich man has lots and lots and lots and lots of sheep. He has so much stuff. He has as much stuff as he could possibly want. And the poor man just has one sheep. That's the only thing he has, just one sheep. Now, one day, a person comes to visit the rich man, and the rich man, instead of taking one of his sheep to make a meal for the person who came to visit him, he decides that he's going to go and take the poor man's one sheep. The only thing that poor man has, he's going to take that sheep away from him and kill it and serve it to his guest for a meal. Now, David, what do you think should happen to the rich man? What should his punishment be? Now, why do you think Natan is telling David this story? What's the story about? Cleo, what do you think?
It's like he did it.
Hold on a second. One at a time. Cleo, what do you think?
The reason he's telling him it is because what the answer that he says happens to the rich man, it's gonna happen to David.
Right, because who's the rich man in the story, really?
David.
And who is the poor man in the story?
I forgot. Uriah,
right? The person that David got killed. And who's the sheep in the story?
Uriah.
No,
Bathsheba, right? David, the rich man, took Bathsheba, the poor man's sheep, just for himself, right? So Natan asked David, what do you think should happen to the rich man? And when David heard this story, he said, he got so angry, and he said, the rich man should be put to death. The thing he did was so terrible. He took that poor man's sheep, and at that point, Natan turned to David and said, David, that rich man is you. This story is about you. And what you are saying is that you understand that the thing you did, that you stole Bathsheba and you killed Uriah, that was a terrible, terrible, terrible thing to do. And so what he said to him, and you might hear this is a famous part of the story, is Natan turns to David and he says, David, you are that man. He says, Ata ha'ish, you are the person who this story is about. And you should understand that you did a terrible thing. And I can't believe you did that. And
wait, so what was his punishment? What did he answer? What should happen to the poor man again? He should get killed.
So this is what happened. So David, to his credit, David said, oh my goodness, Natan, you're right. I can't believe I did this terrible thing. I did the worst possible thing. I can't believe it. I am so sorry. But even though David is sorry, he can't fix it because Uriah is already dead. So even though David is sorry, something terrible already happened. And there's nothing that David can do now to change it, right? There's sometimes when you make mistakes, you can fix it. But when you make a mistake like that and someone gets killed because of it, mistakes like that can't be fixed. So David says to Natan, I'm so sorry. What should happen? And Natan said to him, okay, David, I'm glad you're sorry, but you're still going to be punished. What do you think the punishment is going to be? Adi, what do you think?
He can't build a Beit HaMikdash now.
I think it's that he can't build a Beit HaMikdash, or Hashem's not going to listen to him anymore.
So it's actually, he already couldn't build a Beit HaMikdash already because he was too violent. But the punishment this time, and this is, one of the most terrible punishments that could happen, is he said to David, Bathsheba right now is pregnant. That baby, right after that baby is born, that baby is going to die. because of what you did. And that's what happens. All right? It's very, very, very sad.
Couldn't his punishment just be you have to marry another person and then she could find somebody else and then she gets to keep the baby? 'Cause that's also not fair to the baby, not
You're
just
right.
him.
You're
And
totally
it's
right,
also
right?
not fair to.
So he should just live with another dad.
You're right.
Like,
You know,
yeah, the first one's mean, but then that doesn't mean since he's mean, that doesn't mean it gets to ruin your life.
Henry, I think
Okay.
you were totally right. I mean, look, one of the things we learn in the Torah is that if a parent makes a mistake, the parent gets punished. The children aren't supposed to be punished. So you have a good point. Why is David's child being punished?
The baby
And why is
was
Bathsheba
punished
being punished?
very badly.
Right. So it
Well,
seems
He's
kind of not
also
fair.
being punished a bit.
Cleo, what do you think?
But Bathsheba's so mean.
It's also mean because baby.
all of human beings on the whole entire earth.
Hold on a second. Cleo, what do you think?
It's also mean to the baby because babies don't usually do anything bad. So why would you punish a baby if it didn't do anything to you?
Exactly. I'm totally with you. Adi, what do you think?
Usually,
Well, why should the baby be punished if it was David, and why should also Bathsheba be punished? Because it was only David, and it was not the baby, and it was not Bathsheba.
You're right. It doesn't seem very fair. It really doesn't seem very fair. But that's what the story says.
no.
So the baby dies, and David is so sad about it. He's crying and crying and crying. But the baby, right after the baby is born, the baby dies.
Then shouldn't Bathsheba say, I can't be your husband. I mean, your wife anymore. You've already punished me like a little bit. Like you already made me not be allowed to have. But you didn't know that.
You know, I don't know if Bathsheba really got a choice about it, right? It doesn't look like she got much of a choice in marrying David. I don't know if she got a choice in divorcing David either. But that's what happened in the story. Now, the only other part of the story that I can tell you, the only, I guess good part of the story is that Bathsheba does have more children. And the next child that Bathsheba has is Shlomo. And Shlomo, we're going to find out, ends up being the king after David dies. But that doesn't happen for a while, and we're going to find out that before Shlomo becomes the king, there's a bunch of other people who wanted to be king instead of David first. And Shlomo's brothers are not so happy with the idea that Shlomo should. So that is what happens next. So next week,
a lot when they decide who's king.
And next week, what we're going to learn about.
When it's Shaul versus David,
Right. Okay. Next week, what we're going to learn about is how David's children start deciding that they want to be king first. And they want to be king instead of David. And so David's story at this point starts to get a little bit more sad. But we are going to learn that next time. So guys, we are going to learn again on Tuesday. We're not going to learn on Thursday because it's right before Shavuot. Adi has a question, then Shoshana has a question, then we're going to go. Adi, what's your question?
Those be because it's I forgot what I was going to say.
Okay, why don't you take a second? Shoshana, what's your question?
But look, I can make it bigger and smaller.
Can you stop?
Okay, Shoshana, what's your question?
Any children. Michal couldn't have any children. It's small.
Right, Michal, one of David's other wives, didn't get to have any children. That's totally right.
So basically, he punished 3 people for no reason in his life.
You're right. A lot of people get punished because of David. You're totally right.
Michal, the baby, and Bathsheba.
Mm-hmm. Adi, what do you think?
Why does David's story get a little sadder? Cause at the beginning he was a little bit good and a little bit bad, and now he's very bad.
I don't know why it gets sadder, but you know, it seems like some of David's children, and this happens not just with David, but with a lot of kings. A lot of time, if a king has a lot of wives, and those wives have lots of kids. So like a lot of kings, if they marry lots of wives, don't just have like 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 kids. They have like 20 kids or 30 kids. And a lot of times, if they have so many kids, those kids start fighting with each other and saying, I want to be the king. I want to be the king. I want to be the king. So what happens next is David's children start to fight about who is going to be the king next. And that is not so pleasant for the person who's already the king, their father. All right, there's more to the story, but we are out of time. So I hope you all have a wonderful Shabbat, and I'm excited to learn with you again on Tuesday.
Bye.